A young woman named Emma stood at the edge of the life she had known, staring down a path she never imagined. She was only 23, full of dreams and hopes, but life had a way of turning her world upside down. Emma was born into a humble family, and though her parents tried their best, there had always been struggles. They didn't have much, but they made do with what they could. Emma had grown up seeing the sacrifices her mother and father made, always working hard to provide the basics for their family. But the weight of their financial troubles had slowly begun to crush them, especially after her father's business went under. Emma, knowing the strain her parents were facing, tried to help as best as she could. She worked part-time jobs after school, saved every penny, and did whatever she could to ease the burden. However, despite her efforts, the situation only worsened. It was when her mother fell ill and the medical bills piled up that Emma began to feel the real pressure of their financial ruin. One day, out of the blue, her mother brought up a suggestion that Emma had never even thought possible. "Emma," her mother said softly, "there is someone who has shown interest in you, someone who could help us out of this mess. His name is Mr. Jebediah Stone." Mr. Stone was a name that Emma had heard before, but she never thought she would be involved with him. He was a man in his late 70s, wealthy and very much a recluse. Everyone in town knew of him, but no one really knew him. He lived in a large old mansion at the edge of town, surrounded by rumors and whispers. People said he was lonely and eccentric, that he had no family, and that his wealth had come from decades of investments and secret dealings. At first, Emma was shocked when her mother mentioned the possibility of marriage. Mr. Stone, being so much older, seemed more like a distant figure, a stranger almost. Why would he want to marry her, someone so young and full of life? But her mother explained that Mr. Stone had promised to help them, and there was a catch. He needed a wife, and Emma was the one he had chosen. The offer was one Emma never thought she would have to consider. Marriage to someone so much older was unimaginable, but her mother's frail condition and their crippling debt made it hard for her to say no. Her mother's health was deteriorating fast, and the thought of her family losing their home, their last bit of hope, became too overwhelming. It was a decision that weighed heavily on Emma's heart, but it seemed like the only way out. After a week of deep contemplation, Emma reluctantly agreed. She knew that by doing this, she could save her family, and that was the only thing that kept her going. The wedding took place in a small ceremony at Mr. Stone's mansion. There was no grand celebration, no guests, just Emma, her family, and a few of Mr. Stone's distant relatives who had come for the occasion. The whole thing felt more like a business arrangement than a celebration of love. When Emma first laid eyes on her new husband, she couldn't help but feel a mixture of pity and disbelief. Mr. Stone, though still very much alive, was frail and weak. His hair was white, his hands trembled, and his face had deep wrinkles that spoke of years filled with experiences she could only imagine. His voice, although steady, was soft and raspy. He was not the man Emma had imagined, but then again she didn't know what to expect. He was a stranger to her, and this marriage was something that had been forced upon her by circumstance, not love. Their first night together was quiet and uncomfortable. Mr. Stone did not expect anything from her, and Emma, though nervous and unsure, found herself alone in the large, empty house surrounded by silence. There were no fireworks, no romantic gestures, just the reality of the situation settling in. The days that followed were filled with awkward conversations, as they got to know each other, albeit in an impersonal way. Mr. Stone was polite, but he didn't seem particularly interested in her as a person. He didn't ask her about her hopes or dreams. Instead, he often spoke about his past, his regrets, and his many investments. At times, Emma felt like she was listening to a man telling stories from another world, a world that had little to do with hers. Despite the awkwardness, Emma tried to make the best of her new life. She took on the role of his wife in the most basic sense, preparing meals, making sure he took his medicine, and keeping the house in order. She wasn't in love with him, nor did she expect to be. Love, she knew, was not part of this arrangement. It was a duty, a sacrifice for the well-being of her family. As the weeks went on, Emma found herself growing accustomed to the rhythm of the house, to the isolation that came with living in such a vast and lonely mansion. Though she missed her family terribly, she couldn't deny the relief that came with knowing they were safe, that the burden of debt was lifted, and her mother could rest without the stress of worrying about bills or losing their home. But with that relief came a deep loneliness, one that seemed to weigh heavily on her heart. Emma spent most of her days in solitude. She took long walks around the mansion's expansive gardens, hoping that nature would provide some solace. Her life had been filled with so much struggle that she now felt like she was merely surviving rather than living. The dreams she once had, of traveling, of making something of herself, seemed distant, out of reach. She couldn't help but wonder if she had given up on those dreams too soon, just to secure the future of her family. One night, as Emma sat by the fireplace in the grand living room, her mind wandered to thoughts of what her future held. She looked at the old man sitting across from her, his frail body barely visible under a blanket, and wondered if this was really all there was to life. The marriage, the house, the safety, they all felt empty to her. She had traded her freedom for stability, but in doing so, had she lost herself? The question lingered in her mind, but she didn't have the answers. The next year was unpredictable, full of challenges and moments of self-reflection. Emma knew that she had to keep pushing forward for her family's sake. But as she sat alone in that mansion, she couldn't help but feel a sense of longing, a longing for a life that was truly hers. The first few months of Emma's new life felt like an endless blur. Days stretched out in front of her, filled with tasks she performed out of habit rather than enthusiasm. She had married Mr. Stone to save her family, but there was no joy in it. Instead, there was a kind of numbness that settled over her. Every morning she woke up in a mansion that felt more like a prison, its grandness echoing her isolation. Despite the wealth, the spacious rooms, and the beautiful surroundings, Emma felt as if she were living in a world that wasn't hers. Her new husband, Mr. Stone, never asked for much. He had a routine, a daily pattern that he followed almost mechanically. He would wake up early, sometimes before the sun rose, and shuffle down the hall to his study. His mind was still sharp, but his body had begun to show the signs of age in ways that were impossible to ignore. He couldn't move around without help, his hands trembling whenever he tried to lift anything. Emma would quietly watch him from a distance as he tried to hold on to the past, clinging to old habits even though his body was no longer able to keep up. At first, Emma felt pity for him. She had never imagined her life would turn out this way. She had dreamed of a future where she could travel, see the world, and experience things that others her age were just beginning to enjoy. But now she was trapped. She had no friends in the mansion, no one to talk to except Mr. Stone, who spoke to her more like a caretaker than a husband. They exchanged pleasantries, but those were few and far between. He didn't need her to be more than someone to manage his household. She cooked for him, made sure he took his medication, and kept the house in order. It wasn't a fulfilling life, but it was a life that she could tolerate for the sake of her family. Yet, even in this bleak environment, there were moments that made her stop and think. There was a kindness in Mr. Stone that she hadn't expected. He never raised his voice, never demanded anything of her that she wasn't capable of giving. And sometimes, when he thought she wasn't looking, he would glance at her with a look of gratitude, a look that made Emma wonder if, deep down, he was lonely too. It was on one of those days, while she was working in the kitchen, that Emma noticed something odd. She had prepared a simple meal of soup and bread, the kind of food that was easy to make but comforting. When she brought the meal to Mr. Stone's study, he didn't look up from his papers as she set the tray down beside him. Emma, used to the routine by now, was about to leave when she noticed a small photo frame on the desk, a picture of a woman she hadn't seen before. The woman was young, smiling, and sitting beside a much younger Mr. Stone. She was beautiful, her dark hair flowing down her shoulders, and her eyes sparkled with a warmth Emma had never seen in his eyes. Curious, Emma asked, "Who is she?" Her voice was soft, almost tentative, as if she was afraid to disrupt the quiet atmosphere. Mr. Stone's eyes drifted from the papers to the photo, and a flicker of emotion crossed his face. He smiled, but it was a sad smile. "Her name was Eleanor," he said quietly. "She was my first love." The words hung in the air, and for a moment Emma didn't know what to say. She had always assumed that Mr. Stone had led a life of solitude, but hearing him speak of someone he had loved so deeply made her realize just how much she didn't know about him. He continued, "Eleanor and I were to be married, but things didn't turn out the way we had planned. She passed away many years ago, but I never stopped loving her. I've kept her memory alive in little ways." His voice faltered slightly, and Emma could tell that the pain of losing her was still fresh. Even after all these years, Emma felt a strange pull in her chest, a sympathy she hadn't expected. Here was a man who had lived a long life, filled with both love and loss, and yet he was still holding on to the past in the only way he knew how. She realized that Mr. Stone wasn't just an old man in need of a caretaker. He was someone who had once been young, full of hope and full of dreams, just like her. Over the next few weeks, Emma started to see him in a different light. She wasn't sure if it was the constant isolation or the fact that she was slowly learning more about his past, but she found herself talking to him more. They would sit together in the evenings and he would tell her stories about his younger years, about the business he had built, the places he had traveled, and the people he had known. She listened, intrigued by the way he spoke of his past, as if each memory was a treasure he was carefully keeping. But it wasn't just his stories that kept Emma's attention. It was the small moments of kindness that began to make her feel something she hadn't felt in a long time: warmth. There was one particular day when Mr. Stone, seeing her sit quietly by the fire, had an idea. He had never been one for grand gestures, but he understood the power of a thoughtful act. He had a bouquet of flowers sent to Emma, something simple yet meaningful. When she saw the flowers, a small smile crept onto her face. It wasn't a romantic gesture, but it was a sign that, in his own way, he cared. Emma began to soften toward him, though the bitterness of her situation still lingered in the back of her mind. She wasn't in love with him, far from it, but she was beginning to understand that love didn't always come in the form she had imagined. Sometimes it came in the quiet moments shared between two people, in the unspoken understanding that, even though their lives were different, they were both looking for the same thing: companionship. As the months passed, Emma's thoughts started to shift. She no longer saw her marriage as a punishment, but as a partnership, albeit an unconventional one. She began to find comfort in the routine, in the simple acts of care and kindness that were becoming a part of her daily life. But even as she started to appreciate Mr. Stone's company, a deep sense of longing still remained. She missed her family terribly, and the dreams she had for her future were still there, tucked away in the corners of her heart. One afternoon, as she walked through the mansion's garden, Emma felt a pang of homesickness. She longed for the laughter of her friends, for the carefree days she had once known, but she also realized that she had gained something unexpected, a sense of resilience. Her life had changed in ways she never thought possible, and though she hadn't chosen this path, she was learning to walk it with grace. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in months, she felt a flicker of hope. As the months stretched into the second half of the year, Emma began to notice subtle changes in herself. She had never thought she would adapt to her new life, but somehow she was starting to. The mansion, once an intimidating fortress of solitude, had begun to feel more like a home. It wasn't a home in the traditional sense, with laughter and warmth, but it was a place where she could breathe, where she could find peace amidst the silence. And while she still longed for the life she had left behind, she had learned to appreciate the small comforts that came with living in such a grand, albeit lonely, house. Mr. Stone, despite his frailty, continued to surprise Emma. He had always been kind, but recently there had been a shift. The old man, who once seemed so distant and cold, had started to show a warmth she hadn't expected. It wasn't a love that a young woman might hope for from her husband, but it was something. It was kindness in its purest form, something Emma hadn't felt from anyone for a long time. One morning, after finishing her chores, Emma found Mr. Stone sitting by the large windows in the living room, staring out at the sprawling grounds. He had a distant look in his eyes, almost as if he were lost in thought. She had grown used to his silences, but today she noticed something different about him. He wasn't just lost in his memories. He was staring at the world outside with a kind of longing. "Mr. Stone," Emma said, breaking the silence. "Are you all right?" His head turned slowly to face her, and for the first time in a while, he gave her a real smile. Not one of politeness, but a genuine smile. "I've been thinking," he said softly. "Thinking about how life changes. How time moves on, whether we want it to or not." Emma nodded, unsure of what to say. She didn't know much about his past or the experiences that had shaped him. She didn't know what it felt like to lose someone you loved, to have time slip through your fingers. But she knew the sting of missed opportunities, the pain of giving up on dreams. Maybe that was something they shared. Sometimes, he continued, his voice barely above a whisper, I wish I had done things differently. But life doesn't give us those second chances, does it? His words struck a chord with Emma. She had often thought about the life she had left behind, about the dreams she had buried to help her family. And now, sitting here in this mansion, surrounded by luxury, she couldn't help but wonder what her life would have been like if she had followed her own path. But she had made a choice just as Mr. Stone had. And now, they both had to live with the consequences of those choices. As the weeks passed, Emma started to see Mr. Stone in a new light. The stories he told, once filled with regret and sorrow, now seemed more like lessons. He didn't offer advice or guidance in a traditional way. Instead, he shared his life with her, as if he were giving her pieces of his heart. And while she still didn't love him in the way she had once imagined love would be, she found herself caring for him in a way she hadn't expected. It wasn't just the acts of kindness and the flowers, the small gifts, the thoughtful gestures. It was the quiet companionship they shared. Mr. Stone had never pressured her to be anything other than what she was. He never asked for more than she could give. And in return, Emma began to feel something she hadn't realized she was missing. A connection. They began to spend more time together, not out of obligation, but out of choice. Emma would sit beside him in the evenings and they would talk for hours, sharing stories of their lives. She told him about her childhood, about her parents, about the dreams she once had of becoming a teacher, of seeing the world. She told him of the things she had sacrificed and the things she still hoped for, even if those hopes seemed distant now. In turn, Mr. Stone spoke of his younger days, of the business he had built, of the love he had lost, of the loneliness he had endured. But his stories weren't just filled with sadness. There were moments of joy, too, moments that made Emma laugh, made her see him not as the old man she had married, but as a man who had once lived with passion and purpose. It was during these evenings that Emma realized how much she had come to care for him. She didn't love him in the way she had once dreamed of love, but she respected him. She appreciated his honesty, his vulnerability, and his strength. He had lived a life filled with ups and downs, with successes and failures, and yet he still stood strong, facing each day with quiet dignity. One afternoon, as Emma sat in the garden, she thought about her life once more. She thought about her family and the sacrifice she had made to give them a future. She thought about the dreams she had left behind and wondered if they were still possible. Could she still pursue them? Or had she already given up on them too easily? But as she sat there, she realized something. She had been living in the past, clinging to what could have been instead of embracing what was. She had married Mr. Stone not because she loved him, but because she had no other choice. But over time, that decision had shaped her in ways she hadn't expected. She was stronger now, more resilient, and more capable than she had ever been. She had faced challenges, made sacrifices, and learned to adapt, and maybe, just maybe, there was still time for her to chase those dreams. Later that evening, as the sun began to set, Mr. Stone asked if she would join him for dinner. As they sat at the table, the soft glow of the candles casting a warm light over the room, Emma found herself feeling content. It wasn't the life she had imagined for herself, but it was a life she had made her own. And in that moment, she realized that maybe that was enough. As the days went by, Emma's heart began to soften. The walls she had built around herself, walls made of fear, anger, and resentment, began to crumble. She started to see Mr. Stone not as a man she was trapped with, but as someone who had become an unexpected companion. Their relationship was still complex, filled with moments of uncertainty, but it was also filled with moments of warmth and understanding. For the first time in a long while, Emma allowed herself to hope again. It had been almost a year since Emma's life had taken such an unexpected turn. The changes, both in herself and in her relationship with Mr. Stone, had been gradual but undeniable. Every day seemed to bring something new, a quiet moment of realization, a gesture that made her heart stir, or a conversation that led her to see the world from a different perspective. However, nothing could have prepared her for what happened next. It was a warm afternoon when the world around her changed, though at first she didn't realize it. The house had been unusually quiet, and she found herself once again wandering the gardens, a place where she often went to clear her mind. The flowers were blooming and the soft breeze carried the scent of jasmine. As Emma walked slowly through the path lined with tall hedges, she was lost in her thoughts. It was in these moments of solitude that she reflected on everything she had been through, the loneliness, the struggles, the unexpected companionship she had found with Mr. Stone. But as she passed by the back of the mansion, she noticed something strange. The door to the old study, the room where Mr. Stone spent most of his time, was slightly ajar. Emma, curious as always, quietly approached, her heart beating a little faster. She had never really intruded on Mr. Stone's private space, respecting his solitude, but this time something felt different. Maybe it was the quiet, the way the light filtered through the curtains, or the sense of anticipation that hung in the air. She peered inside. What she saw made her stop in her tracks. There on the desk was a large envelope with her name written across it in Mr. Stone's neat handwriting. But it wasn't just any envelope. It was sealed with a wax stamp, a sign of importance, of something meant to be kept private. Her curiosity got the better of her. She walked slowly into the room and picked up the envelope. It was heavy, and there was a sense of weight behind it, as though it held something significant. As she held it in her hands, Emma could feel her heart rate increase. She knew this wasn't just some simple letter. It had been left for her, and that meant something. She couldn't explain why, but it felt as though the moment had arrived, the moment that would change everything. Taking a deep breath, Emma broke the seal and unfolded the letter inside. The words were simple, yet they carried the power of a lifetime. Dear Emma, by the time you read this, I may no longer be around. My health has deteriorated faster than I anticipated. But before I go, I want you to know that you have made this last chapter of my life one of peace. You've given me companionship when I needed it most, and I've come to respect you more than I could ever express. I've thought long and hard about what to do with the wealth I've accumulated, and it seems only right that you are the one to inherit it. Not because of the marriage we entered into, but because of who you are. Someone who showed kindness, who gave without expecting anything in return. You've earned it. I've arranged for everything to be transferred to you. My estate, my savings, my investments. This is my final gift to you. Use it wisely. Live the life you deserve and follow the dreams you once had. I may not have been able to give you what you wanted in a husband, but I hope this will help you build a future that is truly yours. Emma could barely breathe as she finished reading the letter. Her hands trembled and her heart pounded in her chest. She felt a flood of emotions: disbelief, shock, gratitude, and something else she couldn't quite put into words. Mr. Stone, the man she had married out of necessity, had left her everything. The wealth, the estate, the future she never thought she could have. It was all hers. But even more than that, there was something deeply personal in the letter. It wasn't just about the money or the possessions. It was about the recognition of who she had become. He had seen her, truly seen her, in a way that no one else had. He acknowledged her sacrifices, her strength, and the way she had quietly made his life better, even if it had never been easy. Emma sat there, stunned, holding the letter in her hands for a long time. The mansion around her seemed to fade away as she processed the enormity of what had just happened. She had always felt as though she were living someone else's life, a life forced upon her by circumstances. But now everything had changed. She wasn't just a woman trapped in a marriage for the sake of survival. She was a woman with options, with power, with a future of her own making. For the first time in months, Emma felt free. The weight of the past year lifted from her shoulders. She could now choose her path, follow her dreams, and live the life she had once imagined, the life that had seemed so distant when she first stepped into this house. But even as she felt this rush of freedom, there was still a part of her that couldn't shake the bond she had formed with Mr. Stone. He had given her everything. Yes, but he had also given her something far more valuable, a glimpse into the kind of woman she could become. A woman who could be kind, who could make difficult choices and still find a way to live with grace. Emma stood up slowly, still holding the letter in her hands, and walked over to the large window that looked out over the gardens. She felt a new sense of purpose stirring inside her. The world outside was waiting for her. She had a chance to do something with her life, to make something of the opportunities she had been given. As she looked out over the landscape, a thought crossed her mind. She had spent so much of her life caring for others, trying to fix things that seemed broken, that she had never really taken the time to think about what she wanted. But now the future was hers. She could take the inheritance, the legacy Mr. Stone had left her, and turn it into something meaningful. She could travel, see the world, and pursue the dreams she had abandoned years ago. The decision was clear. She wasn't going to stay in this mansion forever, living a life of quiet solitude. She had learned so much in the past year, and it was time for her to take those lessons and build something new, something for herself. Emma carefully placed the letter back in the envelope and walked out of the study, her mind racing with possibilities. She knew that her life wasn't going to be easy. Nothing ever was. But for the first time, she felt ready to face whatever came next. As Emma looked out over the expansive garden, the weight of the letter still pressed heavily on her mind. It was hard to believe that just a year ago she had felt trapped, unsure of her future, and now here she stood with the power to shape her own destiny. The letter from Mr. Stone had changed everything. The wealth, the estate, the freedom, they were all now in her hands, and for the first time, Emma realized that she had the chance to live a life that was truly hers. The initial shock of Mr. Stone's unexpected generosity began to fade, and with it came clarity. Emma knew that she could no longer just exist in this grand mansion. She had spent too many months in silence, allowing herself to become a passive participant in a life that was not hers to dictate. Now she had the power to make choices, to do what she had always dreamed of doing, to truly live. The first thing she did was leave the mansion for the day. It wasn't that she wanted to leave forever, but she needed time to think, to clear her head, and to figure out what her next steps would be. She drove into town, the familiar streets feeling different somehow. As she passed the shops, the cafes, and the places she used to visit before all of this started, she felt a mix of nostalgia and excitement. She had missed this, the simple everyday life that had once felt so distant and unreachable. It was strange to be back, but it also felt like a step toward reclaiming the life she had left behind. Emma walked into the small cafe where she used to meet her friends. It was quiet, the midday rush long over, and the barista greeted her with a warm smile. She ordered a simple coffee and sat by the window, watching the world go by. For a few moments, she let herself relax, enjoying the familiar hum of life outside. She had always loved this part of the town, the calmness of it, the way everything seemed to move at its own pace. And for the first time in a long while, Emma allowed herself to dream again. She thought about her future. She could travel. She could finally go to the places she had always wanted to see, the places she had imagined in her daydreams. There was so much to explore, so much to experience. She thought about the career she had put on hold, the one she had always wanted but had never been able to pursue because of her family's struggles. She could go back to school or start her own business. The possibilities felt endless, and for the first time in years, she felt the stirrings of ambition rising within her. But even as she thought about all the things she could do, there was still a part of her that couldn't forget the man who had given her this chance. Mr. Stone had done more than just leave her his wealth. He had left her with something more valuable, a sense of purpose, a sense of self. She didn't know how much time he had left, but she knew she needed to thank him, to express the gratitude that had been growing in her heart. After finishing her coffee, Emma returned to the mansion, her mind made up. It was time to speak to Mr. Stone. She had spent so much of her time avoiding her true feelings, pretending that she didn't care about the man she had married. But the truth was, she did care, and she needed him to know that. When she entered the study, Mr. Stone was sitting by the window looking out over the same garden Emma had just walked through. His frail figure seemed smaller than ever in the vast room, but his presence was undeniable. He turned to her as she entered, his tired eyes softening when he saw her. "Emma," he said, his voice gentle but clear. "I wasn't expecting you. Is everything all right?" Emma nodded, taking a deep breath before speaking. "I've been thinking a lot lately," she began. "About everything. About us, about what you've done for me and what I want to do with the life you've given me." She paused, unsure of how to express the gratitude that swelled in her chest. "You've changed my life, Mr. Stone. You've given me a chance I never thought I'd have." Mr. Stone looked at her silently for a moment, his gaze deep and knowing. There was a flicker of something in his eyes, something like pride or perhaps relief. He had always seemed distant, but in that moment, Emma realized that he had been waiting for her to say something like this, waiting for her to take control of her life, to find her own way. "You deserve it, Emma," he said quietly, his voice thick with emotion. "You've shown me more kindness than I ever expected. You've been patient with me even when you didn't have to be. I may not have been able to give you everything you wanted, but I hope this gives you a chance to live the life you deserve." Emma swallowed the lump in her throat. She hadn't expected this conversation to be so emotional. She had never imagined that she would find herself feeling this way about Mr. Stone, that she would ever be so grateful to him. But now, as she looked at him, she realized how much she had changed. She wasn't the same woman who had walked into this house a year ago. She was stronger, more certain of who she was and what she wanted. "I don't know what the future holds," Emma said softly, "but I know that I want to live it. I want to see the world, chase my dreams, and build something for myself. And I'll always be grateful to you for giving me that chance." Mr. Stone's eyes glistened with unshed tears. "I'm glad, Emma. I'm glad to see you finally believing in yourself." There was a long silence between them, a comfortable silence filled with unspoken understanding. Emma didn't know what the future held, but she knew that she was no longer the woman who had felt trapped in a life she didn't choose. She was someone who could stand on her own, someone who could make her own decisions and follow her own path. The next few weeks passed in a blur of planning and excitement. Emma sold the mansion and moved into a smaller, more modest home. She started taking courses online, learning about business and entrepreneurship. She took the first steps toward building the life she had always dreamed of, and with each step, she felt more alive. Mr. Stone, though frail, continued to be a quiet presence in her life. They spoke often, and Emma visited him whenever she could. But now their relationship had shifted. It was no longer about obligation or duty. It was about mutual respect and a deep, unspoken bond that would forever tie them together. In the end, Emma realized that Mr. Stone had given her something even more valuable than money or property. He had given her the freedom to be herself, to live her life on her own terms. And for that she would be forever grateful. As she stood at the edge of the life she had once thought was impossible, Emma looked forward to the future with hope and anticipation. The world was wide, and she was ready to take it on, one step at a time.